Hey, thanks for having me here this morning. It's a privilege to be here. My father's always been a big supporter of JINSA. Since I was young and in college, I'd be getting mailings. He'd read his stuff and mail it to me. But I really appreciate what you all stand for. I am Don Bick. I was raised on a farm in Illinois. Joined the Air Force at 21, retired at 51, and I planned just to get involved with government, but I campaigned for a incumbent Republican. He was a 16-year incumbent on the day I retired, and I campaigned for about 2 weeks. I retired in November of 14, and I just assumed he'd win, and I'd meet people, and I'd figure out where to get involved, but he ended up losing. 16-year incumbent, and somehow I became the nominee the next cycle to run. So my whole retirement plans changed in about 2 weeks there. So you never know. God opens doors and shuts doors, and you just got to be ready to walk through them. But I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you for what JINSA does. I know that you work a lot with our military, the Israeli military. You do these exchanges, and you're a blessing to many people. So let me just start off by saying I believe it's in our national security interest to ensure that Israel remains secure, that we stand at their defense. It is in our interest to do so. And truth be told, we have helped Israel with weapons, and it's a two-way street. We've also gained back. But the Israelis have done the fighting. But at some day, there may be a point where that we need to be involved personally. And I think we should be ready to do that too. It's in our national security interest to ensure that Israel remains a sovereign Jewish state. So I wanted to say that up front. It's also our responsibility to support Israel in every which way. Right now, we got the F-35. I'm wearing the F-35 pin today. We got the F-35s there before that, the F-16s and F-15s. Before that, we were doing the F-4s. But we have an obligation there, but it's more than that. We have an obligation to support them diplomatically. We know that we see what goes on in the United Nations and how often the Israelis are scapegoated as the one pariah state. And so we got to stand there by them. We can't leave them hanging by themselves. We need to be working on support also economically and through trade. I think we've benefited with a great two-way trade. I was just down there in Israel. I was about a year ago, actually, and I was so impressed with what you see in Tel Aviv. The book, The Startup Nation, there's like 2 startup hubs in the world. Tel Aviv is one of them. Silicon Valley is the other. But we both benefit. But we got to be there economically, diplomatically, and militarily. So I wanted to say that right up front. So let me give you my background. How did I come to these conclusions? Well, first of all, I was raised in an evangelical home, and I wasn't happy with it a lot of times. My dad would make me do Bible studies every morning with him. And you know how that goes when you're a young guy and a teenager too. But there's one thing I always remember what he taught. And it was important to him. And I never forgot it. So it's important to have these things as a parent, right, or as a grandparent. But he taught, those who bless Israel will be blessed. It's right out of the Old Testament. And he said, Don, I want you never to forget that. And I never have forgotten that. And I believe it's a command from the Almighty. Then I got sent to Israel at the age of 15. And there was 15 high school kids in my high school, and then they added a 16th kid. I'll come back to that because he was traveling by himself, and put him in with our high school group. We traveled to Israel, and I was a 15-year-old. I had head knowledge of the Holocaust. But, when you're 15, I could tell you, but I can't really say it hit me down here. Then I went to that Holocaust memorial, and it was like a ton of bricks. It hit me. You could see the individual cost for individuals and families, 6 million, and the hole that it created in Europe. And you walk out, and it was just a tremendous experience in 1979 for me. Now, they've changed it it's different, but even then it was impressive, right? So then I remember being in the bus, and I got a heavy heart. They take us to the Knesset. And I don't remember who got on our bus, some guy from the Knesset. Don't remember, it could have been a tour guide. I don't know who it was. He gets on our bus, and I just remember saying, we're the nation of Israel today, a Jewish state. And you have the Knesset here to ensure that what happened in the 1930s and the 1940s never happens again. We are here to always ensure that we provide a safe haven for Jews all over the world, where there's been 2 millenniums of persecution. And I would just tell you, I almost got out of my seat and go, yeah. And I've never forgot it. That That's the mission and purpose there. And that America must always stand by the side of Israel with that purpose. So then I joined the Air Force. I was sharing with General Wald just a little bit. I was the base commander at Ramstein, and then I got hired to be the deputy commander at 3rd Air Force. And I worked for a great guy named General Breedlove, who's now on your board. I was his deputy. And about that, right before I got hired, he was given the job of standing up long-range missile defense for Israel. And of course, the Israelis have the Arrow missile, but we had a really good radar. We have space capabilities. And so he was given the job, General Breedlove, of integrating a radar, the infrared satellites, the command and control with the Israelis' shooters, we'll just call it the arrows, and then sometimes augmenting them with our standard missile. But being the deputy, the deputies get all these jobs. And so I loved it. And so I traveled to Israel. So we put in a Tipsy radar that could look into Iran. But frankly, if you don't have the space, it takes a while for it to detect a missile. So you get the infrared and it cues it to that radar, and it knows right away where to look. And then you can start figure out where it's going, where it's hitting. And we practiced that mission every day. And I was there for about a year and a half, working with the our counterparts on a red phone. Sometimes I'd be in Israel, but other times we would coordinate from Germany direct. But what a great mission, and very proud that we have done that. Thankfully, we've not had to use that capability. Obviously, we've used the Iron Dome, the short-range missile defense, but someday, I guarantee you, Iran being what it is, this capability is going to be put to the test, and it's got to work. The Iranians, we know, have over roughly 1,000 ballistic missiles, and it is a terrible threat to Israel, but also all of our bases in that region and other allies. And so this capability, ballistic missile defense, is important. But I'll tell you what's also important is the ability to hit back, because in the end, the Iranians aren't going to care. If you hit 80% of their missiles coming, that's not a deterrence. A deterrence is to give them a punch to the nose back that they'll never forget. And we got to remember, it's not just good enough to play defense. You got to be able to have a counterpunch that hurts worse than anything they can give us. And so I'll just throw that out there as a point of thought. But what I've learned from my experience, whether it's my dad's teachings, whether it's going to the Holocaust Memorial in Israel, whether it's serving in the ballistic missile, is that we have this moral obligation to be there, to be a friend and an ally. It's important because we know we have 2 millenniums of persecution. There has to be a safe haven there, and that's why it was initially founded. And it's our obligation to ensure that the Israelis have a qualitative superiority when it comes to weapons. Sometimes the quantity is a quality all its own. I got that, but we got to ensure that there's superior weapon systems that we are working with the Israelis that they have at their disposal. And I got to tell you, I know it's a two-way street. We have gained as much as we've given. When we sell weapons to Israel, they often make them better, and then we get them back. It's an iterative process. And so we have gained from this technology as well. We gain from the intelligence there. And one of the things that we don't acknowledge enough, but maybe in this community, in JINSA there have been also times that the Israelis have taken actions that we have wanted to take, but didn't think we could for whatever reason. That is also very value added. I mean, I just think of the nuclear plant in Iraq. Of course, the Americans weren't happy at the time of that, but in the end, that was a blessing for us later in 1990, when the Iraqis invaded Kuwait, that the Israelis had already destroyed that nuclear power plant that was being used to help design and produce the intention was to eventually give Iraq a nuclear weapon capability. That was Saddam Hussein's goal. So this has been a great two-way relationship, and that's what we want. I would say we have storms on the horizon. I think the world, it's been a hard environment. To date, it's not getting any better. What we've seen in Syria, the collapsed state of Assad, and it's resulted now with over 30,000 Hezbollah or Iranian IRGC subordinate forces in Syria, makes the threat even higher for Israel today. So the Iranians have that land bridge now. They're in Iraq. They're able to operate and transport through Iraq today. And they have a large presence in Syria. The only area that's of challenge is in eastern Syria, where we had our forces, but now we've pulled out of the northern part. And I would just say that the situation is getting worse. We know the Iranians are ascendant in Syria with the number of forces they have. We know that they are arming and training the Hezbollah. In fact, the Israelis are there with them. And they're also arming and supporting the Hamas. And so this situation is getting worse. And we know with the Iranians working on a nuclear capacity, in 10 years, it could be much worse. And we got to be prepared for it. Now, I was told that the JINSA team looks favorable upon a treaty with Israel and the United States. And this is my view. If the Israelis feel like this is beneficial to them, we should do it. If the Israelis see this expands their security, improves their security, then we should be there. We should do this. I think we have, in effect, have one. We've operated that way, but if we need to formalize one, we have a formal treaty with 50 other countries, and we have a much better relationship with Israel than most of all those countries. So I think it's very reasonable to say, let's do a treaty, for national security with the Israelis, if the Israelis think that's in their interest to do so. So I just wanted to respond to that because I know that was of interest here. I want to also just say I think the Israelis have been inspirational for us. As a military guy, when I look at what has been done there, when you see the pictures of Moshe Dayan at the wall, that doesn't tug at somebody's heart. I just read The Lion's Gate. I don't know if you haven't read that book, I recommend it. It's about the 1967 war. It was incredible. It's an incredible story, how it was revealed. But I would just say there's story after story, as me as a 30-year Air Force guy, where I've received inspiration to see what the Israelis done. When you see what was done at Entebbe, that's an incredible story, a real story. And I just that there's a new movie out, but it's based off an old book called Finale of the getting Eichmann out of Argentina. The movie's good. I like the movie. I read the book. The book's even better. But I can just think, I'm indebted to the good work that has been done because I think as a military guy, now retired, it's inspirational. So my hat's off there. So I would want to back up as I make some closing comments. I think when we look at the U.S.-Israeli relationship, sometimes you got to stand back and say, what is going on in the world beyond this? So the United States, let me just back up. I see the world divided into two spots. I simplify things. We have the free world, then we have the totalitarian side of this. And the United States is the leader of the free world, and we got to be. We cannot sit back and become isolationist or just let countries hang out on their own. It does not work. If we pull back, it leaves a void, and that void will be filled by Russia, China, or regionally by Iran. And that doesn't make our world any safer. The free world needs the United States to be there, to be, I would say, a humble leader. Can't be a dictator-like leader, but we got to be a humble leader in this free world. We have to realize there are two sides. There is good and evil in this situation. What Russia's doing in Ukraine, we cannot ignore. Because if it's not Ukraine, then it's the Baltics. We've already seen it in Georgia. What's going on in China should also alarm us. China has 70% of our GDP now. But their money has a little bit better spending power, so theoretically it could be a little higher than 70%. But they could put all their resources on their border and coast, right? Whereas we are worldwide distributed. And then what we see what's going on right now. My whole point is America has to be humble leaders and the leader of the free world, but we can't do it on our own. We need good allies. We can't compete when you got China with 70% of the GDP, putting all its resources in that part of the world. You got Russia, you got Iran. We have to form strong ties with other countries for the good side to win out, for freedom to win out. And that takes me back to Israel. That's why we need to have that strong relationship with Israel, because that is the only democracy in this region. We have to forge that close alliance. But not just there. We have to do the same thing with Australia, Japan, Great Britain. I just go on and on. This is how our values prevail. Our values are the most important instrument of power that we have. I love General Mattis's quote. America has the intimidation power and the inspiration power. But I think our inspiration power is the strongest power. I was down in the Far East 2 weeks ago, and when you talk to those island states, yes, they know America's got wealth, and we bring great capability, and they see China brings in a lot of money. But in the end, they'll tell you it's our values that are most important. The values of freedom, market freedom, or the free markets, equality under the law, the ability to climb that ladder. That's what the world aspires to. That's what they look to. That's why the folks in Hong Kong today are carrying the American flag and singing the national anthem when they're protesting, right? So we can't forget that. So let me just close with this, that may we never forget, those who bless Israel will be blessed. And may our country, through your leadership and mine, always be a nation that is a blessing to Israel. And from that, may God always bless our country. Thank you. Thanks for having me here today.